You're listening to The Maine Show, stories of ordinary Mainers doing extraordinary things. From Madawaska to Kittery, Lubec to Rumford, and everywhere in between. From the Maine Show studio in Bangor, here's your host, Ben Sprague.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to the Maine Show Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Sprague. Today, we are featuring a conversation with Chas Bruns. I've known Chas for a very long time, and I've always found him to be an interesting person, but this was one of the best conversations we've had on the podcast so far, I think. As Chas was talking, I just kind of sat back and listened because his story is so interesting. It's got a lot of different tangents to it. I think Chas will be pretty honest with you that he's gone in a lot of different directions so far in his young life, but very interesting, and Chas has some good advice and perspective on living in Maine as well. He grew up here and then went to California and spent some time in New York, but now he's back here in Maine. He's working on an online show called Dirt Cheap. Find it on YouTube. 250,000 views so far. Dirt Cheap with Chas Bruns, in which Chas literally has gone around the world. He's gone to Thailand. He's doing one now in Bar Harbor about how to do these places on a budget. But in getting to that part of the story, Chas and I went down some fascinating tracks of Chas's work in California. He worked on the Ellen DeGeneres show with Jimmy Kimmel and others, and then back to Maine, where he and some friends put on the West Market Festival, which became the precursor to the KahBang Festival of all things here in Bangor. So if you're interested in entertainment or if you just like a good story, sit back and listen to Chas Bruns tell his story here on the Maine Show Podcast. Well, I always enjoy doing these conversations, but it's especially fun when it's someone who's a friend and somebody I've known for a long time. I think you and I go back to, like, Vine Street.
I was going to say forever, a very long time.
Yeah.
Bangor Originals, baby.
Yeah. So it's been fun following your progress. You've been literally all over the country doing what you do in production and video work, and want to get into all that, but I wonder if we could start from the beginning, if you could tell us a little bit about growing up here in Bangor and where your interest in video and production work came from.
Definitely. I always kind of joke around about growing up in Bangor that there's not a better place in the world to grow up or retire. Everything else in between, you've got to make it fun, but growing up could not be better. It's like a movie, riding bikes around your friend's house. Everybody's doors are unlocked. Yeah. It couldn't be a better place to grow up. And for me, it was actually, I didn't want to leave right away, but I was going to the University of Maine with a friend, Matt Hurley, and this is kind of a funny story because he's now an actor living in New York. But at the time, we were sitting on the University of Maine campus, and we were talking about how he wanted to go to L.A., and he wanted to do acting, and I wanted to do production. And we came around the corner of this building, there's a girl sitting at a plastic pop-up table, and she's like, hey, do you guys want to go to L.A. and do film and TV and acting? And we were like, yeah, we were just talking about that. Are you messing with us? She's like, no, there's an exchange program that you pay Maine tuition to go to L.A. Oh. And so we both put our names in the hat, and it was one of those random things where we didn't know if we'd go to the same school or any of that. We got put in the same room at the same school, Cal State Northridge. She studied acting, and I did filmmaking. And I originally did it because I wanted to do film. But when I got there, I worked at Jimmy Kimmel Live and Ellen DeGeneres and mostly reality and talk shows. Yeah. And I think that's kind of what steered me since then to continue doing reality and talk shows. I did Extreme Makeover for a little while after that, and I would like to get back to scripted someday. That's where my passion is. But for instance, the show Dirt Cheap that you want to talk about today, to produce something like that is pennies on the dollar. If I went to go do an independent feature film, I'd let me raise $1 million versus let me raise 10,000. Yeah. So obviously, I don't. Some of the shows I've worked on, there's been days where I was like filming some reality star's dog taking a crap, and I'm kind of like, what am I doing with myself? This is my life. Yeah. But it's a good starting point, and especially now being back in Maine, which is where I'd love to grow my company and continue doing what I do. I think once again, eventually get to scripted, but right now, starting with reality is the way to go. That was a long-winded answer.
No, that's so interesting. I mean, I was reading some of your bio and background, too, about working on Jimmy Kimmel and Ellen DeGeneres and some of these other ones. Can you tell us a little bit about what kinds of things you were doing, and what was it like to be in that environment working around those people?
It was incredible, to be honest. I mean, both because they're talk shows, I saw a band every day. Yeah. So some day I was in school at the time, but there'd be a day like Monday I'd work Jimmy, and then Tuesday I'd do Ellen, and so I'd see a new band every day. For a little while, I wasn't Ellen's personal assistant, but I was one of the PA gophers for her, and one of my jobs was to read her mail, and you'd be surprised, people like little old ladies would bake her cakes and stuff, and she can't get any of that because like sometimes corporations would send gifts, and it would be considered a bribe. They're trying to get featured on her show. So I remember when 5 Hour Energy came out, they sent her like a 6-month supply. She's like, Chaz, I can't legally take these, you take them. And so I got into the habit of anytime something came in the mail that was something you could eat, I'd bring it back for my roommates and I. And so I had like, these cookies made from some little grandma in Ohio. I remember one time my roommates being like, Chaz, what if this is some psycho person trying to poison Ellen and we're going to eat all this stuff? But luckily we survived, and we got, boxed wine and DVDs, and there was a thing called The Cage that was on the Universal not the Universal backlot. I can't even remember where we shot the show, but it was a big, huge cage where they would put all the extra stuff. Like, say she did a giveaway, and there were 200 people there, but they had 220 items. They'd put the extra items in there, and at the end of the year, we'd all get those gifts. So it was kind of fun to It was definitely a great experience. I didn't get high enough up in the ranks. I think the highest thing I did was for Extreme. I did a little bit. I did technical production, which was setting up a lot of the like internet and stuff like that, so the show would shoot. But then I got to also produce some ABC online content stuff, which was kind of fun.
Cool.
But that was the main reason, to be honest, that I got out of LA in that rat race, was because if you can work hard, but LA is mostly random luck and who you know. So I know people to this day that are still out there working and have been some of the hardest working people I know, got A's in film school with me, and they're still PAs on some show. And it's because they're waiting around for somebody to give them their break, and I kind of was like, all right, it's cool, once again getting stuff that Ellen gets in the mail to bring back to my house, but is this going to get me anywhere? And so that's kind of why, and there's an in-between where I went to New York, which maybe we'll get to in a second, but I eventually made my way back to Maine and said, I have a higher chance playing the lottery in Maine doing my own projects than I do trying to, please some producer so that he'll give me a promotion or something. But
good for you, though, making the decision actually to stop doing that in LA, because it must have been just a surreal world doing that. And I mean, you're working next to Ellen DeGeneres, and it'd be very tempting to say, this is it's never going to get better than this, or to say, I'm going to get a break. I'm around all these famous people. Somebody's going to give me a break. But I imagine you can get plateaued pretty fast doing that.
Yeah, and I won't say his name because I know he'd get mad at me, but there was a senior producer who actually gave me the job at Ellen, and there was one day, it was during the Olympics, and I remember they had me do a little biography on Seth Westcott because I thought they were going to feature him. They're like, oh, you're from Maine, right? And so I was there, and we had done like I think we had actually worked Friday night into Saturdays, so 6 days straight of 16-hour days. And this is normal in LA. That's just how it is. People just work those crazy hours, and we had woken up, and I think he had slept on his couch in his office, and I don't remember where I slept, like under some desk somewhere with the PAs or something. The next morning, I was out of it and tired and hating my life, and I could tell he was too, and we were sitting alone in his office, and I went in there, and I was like, can I ask you a question? And I think he knew it was coming. He's like, yeah. And I was like, do you like this? I was like, is your life fun? I was like, when have you even gone home? And he's like, well, yeah, And at first he got really mad, like his face was red, because this guy that got me the job, right? And I think he knew that he could tell that I was going to move back to Maine and all that was coming, and he was like, he's like, I got stuck in the rat race, and here I am. I got to pay off my house in Santa Monica and my car payments and send my girls to private school and all this stuff. And he's like, it's a love-hate thing. He's like, so unless you're willing to risk that lottery ticket, because you never know what's going to happen in LA, then go do your own thing. And that was kind of the moment where I was like, okay, I'm going to go do my own thing. Which it's not like it's panned out for me yet. I'm not a multimillionaire with awards on the wall, but hopefully if I continue, it'll be a successful venture.
Well, you definitely got some interesting stuff going on now. Tell us a little bit about that move back east. You said you went to New York first and then back to Maine?
Well, actually, it's a really complicated thing, because when I first came back to Maine, I kind of had this moment where I think almost everybody does in entertainment, where they're like, there's no entertainment in Maine. There really isn't. Or at the time, there wasn't for me. I worked in Channel 5 News for a little bit, and then I said, okay, if I want to do entertainment in Maine, what could I do? And I was actually with a friend, John Gillis, who you also know, went to high school with, but we, out of the blue, did a festival downtown called the West Market Festival, and we mostly did it for fun. It was a joke because I said I wanted to throw a huge party downtown for my birthday, and I was like, I'm going to get the permits, and we're going to have a huge outdoor street party.
When would that have been? Early 2000s?
Probably 2004.
Yeah. So
maybe?
before downtown Bangor has since seen this.
Oh, it was like when the Wig and Courier was the only restaurant there. There's nothing else there. It was like, I remember at one point when we were trying to figure out how to pay for it, because we kept getting bigger and bigger. This is the thing. Like, first we were going to have a party in the street. We were close that street, have a party, and then John was like, well, let's get a stage. And I was like, let's get bands. And like, it kept building it, and then we needed money at that point. And so we were going around trying to get people to sponsor us, and it was just a mess because, like I said, there's nobody here. There's getting money for going to something. Give me $200. I'll put your name on a shirt. We'll have a festival. It was a tough thing to do, but we did it, and it was so successful. The next year we had Rustic Overtones, and there was like 2,000 people, and it kind of kept growing. And then entered the KahBang world, which is a now defunct festival. But at the time I founded that with my friend John, who I did West Market with, wanted out of it. He had enough after 2 years, and he moved to Portland. But Tim and I founded KahBang. We actually worked with Alex Gray, who now does Waterfront Concerts. He did our sound and lights the first year for KahBang, and it was fun, but I lost a ton of money that first day, and I had this moment where I'm like, I didn't want to do music so much. I'm more of a film and TV guy. And so I packed it up and moved to New York and left the festival with Tim and some other people. And they did it for a few more years, but indie music, which is what we focused on in Bangor, Maine, is kind of a tough scene. Alex and Water.
And you're ahead of the curve. I mean, you're ahead of the curve in downtown Bangor doing that stuff.
Well, definitely. And I think that's part of the reason it didn't work. It's like the MySpace, Facebook thing. Like I think we had to come in and kind of get that going for.
Sometimes the early adopters are not the ones that are successful with it. Like the first on the scene. You're trying to create this thing, and people don't even know what it is. And the idea of having concerts in downtown Bangor was probably a foreign concept back then.
Exactly.
I've never heard that story actually about your West Market festival transitioning into what became KahBang.
Yeah. Well, I guess I should rewind a little bit. I talk fast, so tell me to slow down if I've had too much coffee today as well. But I remember Tim and I, it was right after John had decided he didn't want to do it anymore. And Tim and I think we were in Patty Murphy's, and we were talking about Billy Mays and the Kaboom spray commercial. And we were making jokes. I don't remember exactly how, but I think Tim was like, well, we should make this festival even twice the size, and we should do it on the waterfront. And we were throwing all these ideas around, and somehow after a few beers, one of us had settled on KahBang was going to be the name. We were going to do it. And the next morning I kind of was like, okay, chalk it up to drunken conversation, whatever. But we kept talking about it in the weeks to follow, and then one day we were just like, all right, everything fell into a row or came together, and we were able to do it. And like I said, it was a success as far as the festival goes. Like, people came, it was fun. We had a few thousand people on the waterfront, and I think it was the first ticketed event. And so we considered it a success that way, but I lost a ton of money. Yeah. And I had this moment where I looked at Tim, and he was excited. He's like, yeah, we lost money, but I'm going to go again. It's going to be great. I can't wait to do next year. And I was like, I'm going to move to New York. I literally moved to New York 2 weeks after the first KahBang festival. Wow. And I did come back every summer to work with the Waterfront Concert guys and KahBang and stuff to try to keep it going. But for me, I just wanted to transition back into film and TV. Yeah. And when I moved to New York, I actually remember being in the airport, and Alex Gray called me, and he's like, hey, I'm thinking about working with Robbie, and we're going to try to do, because KahBang was a one-off event once a year. He's like, we're going to try to do festivals every weekend. It's going to be great. And I was just like, good luck to you guys. I'm not interested. Looking back in hindsight now, that was probably a mistake. I probably should have partnered with Alex, but because he's been hugely successful. So when I got to New York, I was kind of like, do I want to continue doing the same rat race I did in L.A., be a PA for some rich a-hole producer, or whatever, and hope somebody gives me a break? And I said no. So I actually worked at this barbecue wing place the first few weeks and slept on. I moved to New York with $400 in my pocket because I lost all my money with KahBang. So I slept on friends' couches and was just kind of feeling it out. Started doing background work because I'd acted as a kid and acted in LA a little bit, but it was more for fun. But when I was in New York, I was like, hey, I can do this. It's like $75 to $100 a day if you're non-union. I was like, okay, this will help me pay rent and maybe I'll meet some people. And I had so much fun with it that I kind of started focusing on acting again. And I did it for about 3.5, 4 years in New York, and it was awesome. But as you can imagine, paying like $2,000, $2,500 for a shoebox bedroom and trying to live off acting wasn't the best long-term plan, I guess. And so I decided that I was going to move back to Maine again and reassess. I worked at a radio station right when I came back with Josh Winery, who you also know. Yeah. So New York was amazing. In my opinion, it's my favorite city I've ever lived. It's like the modern-day Rome for me. But just the money was outrageous. I remember I had to climb up a ladder above a stove to climb into my loft bed one day. And then on the back side of that was this little shower. And I was just like, I'm living like a rat in a basement. Yeah. And I'm paying exorbitant amounts of money when I could be like, going to Bar Harbor and sitting on the beach. Yeah. And I wasn't getting much headway there either because even with acting, like days that I got some big speaking roles alongside big people, the movie might never even see the light of day. Like, there's 3 movies that had multi-million-dollar budgets that I was on that never got edited or released. And I'm just like, all right.
Yeah.
So once again, it's one of those things. It's like, am I going to make other people's dreams come true and make other people rich and famous, or focus on my own thing?
Yeah. Well, that's fascinating. I'm glad your road did end up bringing you back to Maine for now. I mean, to get the chance to live and work in New York and California must have given you a lot of perspective on life back in Maine. Can you tell us a little bit about what your transition back the second time to Maine was like and how it's been for you?
I mean, in my 20s, especially, like I said, working low-level production and acting, I think I, on average, made between $15,000 to $25,000 a year. It was like miserable wages.
Living in California and New York.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it was tough. And that was a whole decade of my life. And I remember going back to Josh Wintery, and it was Town Square Media, the radio station here in Bangor. It was the day before I was deciding in New York if I was going to renew my lease. And this is a guy I worked with on KahBang. And he sends me a message. He's like, I'm working at this radio station. It's great. And they want to pay you $47,000 a year to come back and do events like you did with KahBang. You should do it. So right away, I was like, $47,000? Yeah. That's more than I've ever made. Yeah. You know, looking at it now, it's not a huge amount of money, but it was at the time for me. And I was like, okay, if I don't renew my lease, I'll go back for like 6 months to a year, make some money, and then do my own projects. Which is exactly what I did. I actually only made it, sadly, Josh hates me for this, but I only lasted 8 months there. I'm just not a tuck your shirt in, put a tie on type of guy. I remember like half the staff at the Monday morning meetings, for, like 8 a.m. is early for me. Like, I'm lucky if I get up at 9 ever. Yeah. And so we'd have these Monday morning meetings, and I'd have to get up at like 6:30 to get there. And I'd always be like asleep on the table and having like 4 cups of coffee, and people are just looking like, who is this guy? What the heck is he doing here? Yeah. I think everybody kind of knew that it was going to be a short-term thing. And I don't remember how the transition happened. I was actually, I do remember I was at a play at the Bangor Opera House, and I ran into this guy Orson, who I knew did carpentry, and I don't even know what possessed me to do it, but as we were leaving, I was like, you do carpentry, right? And he's like, yeah. I was like, I'm going to quit my job at the radio station, and I'm going to be your apprentice. Like I said it jokingly, and he's like, okay, that sounds great. I need somebody. Can you start Monday? And believe it or not, I did that for like a year with Orson, and the only reason it stopped was because he moved to Portland, because the market in Maine or Bangor area was kind of getting oversaturated for carpentry stuff. And I had this moment, was like, okay, I've left LA, I've left New York, I came back to do this job that I was only going to do for a short amount of time and leave. Yeah. Now I'm doing carpentry. Like, what the hell's going on? I was like, you know what? I'm going to get into real estate. Like, I spun off of this whole world of random directions. And I think the reason that at the time, I don't know if this will work out. This is still a game I'm playing, but the reason at the time was that I said, if I can have money coming in doing carpentry and being a landlord that I can fund my projects with and pay such little rent here versus all the money in LA, New York, every month the money was gone, and there's no way I could have done a project. Even if I had the bigger connections and said, let's do something, you just couldn't. And so I bought a house, which you're well aware of because I send you emails all the time about it. But I bought a house on 2nd Street in Bangor, and then another one on 1st Street, and I've renovated it and rented those out. And the money that comes in from that pretty much pays the mortgage, but a little bit of the fluff on top, I'm able to have the freedom to go do the projects I really want. Yeah. That's just such a long-winded answer every time.
No, that's fascinating. It's fascinating.
Because it wasn't a straight shot, I guess. I just did, and that's the thing that if anybody's listening, that I'll tell you is that a lot of times when people do these things, they're already successful. Yeah. So to hear them say it like, oh, you got to do X, Y, Z, I really do think it's important, and I don't know any other way to not say it besides the cliche way, to not give up. And this is coming from somebody who still hasn't made it. I'm still struggling. Yeah. And if I can get up every day and keep doing it and keep spending my own money on projects, maybe check back in 2 years and see if I'm successful, and then you can decide if you want to listen to this advice. But that's what I've taken away from everything I've done, is to not stop, because even though I haven't been successful at anything yet, something's going to hit. Like, I'm going to throw a bunch of stuff at the wall and something will stick, and I don't know what it'll be. Maybe I'll be a successful airline pilot. But there is no one way to get there.
Well, it's fascinating to hear you talk about this, and I mean, I think you're kind of humble about it because you're talking about not being successful, but how many people get a chance to work with Ellen DeGeneres or Jimmy Kimmel?
That's true.
And I lose perspective sometimes too, because I worked for the Red Sox for 4 years, and I lose perspective that for the average person out there, that's like a dream job, and it was at the time for me. But working there, it sort of became another job, and there were challenges, as with any job, and sort of lose perspective on how cool that experience is. Yes. And I think there's probably a lot of people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, or whatever that would love to have spent a decade in California and New York.
No, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
But anyway, so now you're working on this project, Dirt Cheap, with Chas Bruns.
Yes.
It's a show on YouTube.
Yes. For now, yes.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about where the idea for that show came from? And just for those who aren't familiar, tell us a little bit about what you're working on with that show.
Okay. So more or less when I came back here, I was kind of like, what can I do for pennies on the dollar, production-wise, and then also just something that people would want to watch. And so I started right away as a travel show. That's the easiest thing. Yeah. And Anthony Bourdain, who I have great respect for, I don't know if he'd like me in real life, but I think he's awesome. And he had an episode in China. I don't remember which one of his shows it was, but he got the presidential suite at the Hilton or something that they gave to him. It was like $10,000 a night. And I'm watching it, and I'm like, this is cool, but I'm never going to get the $10,000 a night presidential suite at the Hilton. And I just had this moment of like, what if Anthony Bourdain did everything he does, but did it in a way that the average person could do it?
Yeah.
And as I was doing that, I was talking to my girlfriend at the time, and we were sitting on the couch, and she was trying to talk me into taking a vacation. And as I was brainstorming this stuff, and I was like, look, I'll go with you somewhere as long as I can double it into work and film the pilot there.
Yeah.
And she was like, well, where would you want to go? And I randomly was like, Fiji, let's go someplace crazy and exotic. Mostly because of the Tom Hanks movie. Yeah. And there's a bunch of movies there that I actually talked about in the episode. Yeah. But Fiji just, when I was a kid, always just seemed like this exotic, amazing place to go shoot something. Yeah. And so I remember in that moment, she already had the browser open. She's like, I'm going to hit buy on these tickets, so we're just going to do it. And I was just kind of had this moment of like, okay, whatever. Yeah. And she hit it. The next morning, I'm like, crap, we just spent $1,500 on tickets each, and like, I don't even know what we're doing or where we're going. But I threw my camera in my bag, and we went, and we shot it piecemeal, like whenever we'd had time, like, because it was a vacation. So we'd be like drinking margaritas and hanging out, and I'd kind of look at her and be like, hey, you want to film this? Yeah. And she's like, yeah. So we started filming it, and then I got home, and it took me about a month to edit it, and I released it, and really, I don't know what my plan at the time was. I sent it to this one producer at ABC that I had worked with, and she passed. She's like, it's okay. What she said to me is she's like, you're decent, but you're kind of like a goofy frat guy. Like, maybe if you had filmed it with like a big boobed blonde hot chick, it would have been better. And so I was like, okay, yeah, she's right. And I had this moment of like, well, I don't really want to produce or do the production anymore. So I was like, unless I'm in front of the camera, it's just not worth it to me. And so I sat on it for like a year. I just left it on YouTube, and it was slowly garnering hits, but I wasn't paying attention to it. Yeah. And then the same thing happened last January, where a friend was like, we should go on vacation. It was a friend I worked with, Jira Rastana, downtown, who owns Umami, and he's from Thailand originally. He's like, we should go to Thailand and have a month-long vacation. And I kind of said the same thing. I was like, well, if there's some way I can do work there while I'm there, cool, but I don't want to go waste a month of my life getting drunk. Yeah. And he's like, well, why don't you shoot that next episode of Dirt Cheap? He's like, didn't you do that one in Fiji? And I was kind of like, yeah, I guess I could do that. And the same thing happened. Like one night he was just sitting at the bar with his laptop. He's like, I just hit purchase on my ticket. Are you going to do it? And I was like, okay. And I checked my frequent flyer miles on my credit card, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to do this. And so we went there, same thing, filmed for a month, and it was mostly us hanging out, having fun. But that's the other thing. It does cost money, though. I spent something like $5,000 on the Thailand thing, but all said and done, that's extremely cheap in the production world because it's just me and my camera. So I came home and I edited that, and once again had no real agenda. I was like, I'll just add it onto YouTube as well. Yeah. But for some reason, I don't know if the Thailand one is just because I think they're equal in production value, but the Thailand one for some reason got traction. Yeah. And within the first 3 or 4 weeks, I had 3 production companies. 2 in LA and 1 in New York that contacted me, and they're like, hey, we want to pitch you. Like, I didn't know who they were. Yeah. They didn't know who I was. Like, one guy said he saw it in his news feed on Facebook, and I was like, okay, sounds great. And so that all of a sudden I got cocky and like, here's my moment. Like, it's finally happening. And then, like, 3 months passed, and the people stopped calling and stopped doing this because more or less you have to sign a what's called a shopping agreement with them, and they'll take you around to the networks and pitch you. And when it first happened, I was like, well, geez, I don't know if I want to sign with somebody. And I made it go on too long, trying to decide what I was going to do. Calling everybody I knew in the industry, being like, do you know these guys? Are they good? And so finally, I ended up going with a company called, well, I'm not sure if they want me to say their name, so maybe I won't. I'm still in a shopping agreement with them. But one of the producers that worked with them used to work on Extreme Makeover, and I didn't know her directly, but she was a casting producer, and we knew a lot of the same people in common. And so I felt comfortable with her, and they had done, in the past, they've worked on shows like America's Next Top Model and The Apprentice and things like that. So I felt comfortable with them, and they seemed excited about the show. Yep. And the thing that I liked with them is they didn't say that they wanted to replace me. The other 2 people, the same thing. They're like, oh, you're great, but you're getting kind of old, and maybe you could get rid of your beer gut, like things like that. Like, we're going to recast you more or less. Yeah. And this other company that I did sign with, they were like, no, they're like, we want you to do exactly what you do. We're going to give you money, you go with your camera, you film it, you edit it, and you just give it to us, and we'll pitch it to a network.
So is that the process now? There's so many reality-type shows out there, or travel shows, or food shows, or whatever, that are they looking to YouTube to see something, have some success, build a little bit of an audience, and then they can elevate it to possibly being on a cable station?
Yep. Yeah. And there's a couple of ways to go about it. Like if you're lucky enough to get your foot in the door and go meet with, whoever CEO at whatever company, if he's willing to give you that time, even if you get in there, they're going to look at you and be like, okay, thanks. And then you leave, and worst case scenario, they steal your idea from you, and then their high-powered lawyers prove that they didn't. And then best case scenario is that you're the 0.01% that gets a deal. So that's why even myself, who's worked for years in the industry, it's better for me to go with a production company who has those contacts, because they do that every day. They're meeting with those CEOs every day to pitch shows. And when it comes to proving an audience, it's like, there'll be people that spend millions of dollars making pilots every year, whether it's the big studios or whoever. And they'll put tons of money into stuff, and then they shove it because they send it to an audience, and people say, yeah, this show sucks, we don't like it. So they'd much rather prefer somebody like me goes out and spends my own money and my own time and then puts it on YouTube to see if people like it or not anyway, because what's the point if nobody likes it? Yeah. And one thing, I don't know if anybody likes the show yet, because like I said, it's just on YouTube with a few 100,000 views. Maybe if a national market saw it, they'd say the same thing, like, I wish that we could switch this guy out for a hot chick. but hopefully, I think right now that it is. I mean, a few thousand people a day are watching. I'm crazy about it. I look every night to see what my stats are, and it's like another 1,000 people on average a day total for the videos are watching it. So whether they like it or not, I mean, it's mostly thumbs up, mostly good comments. You know how it is online, though. There's trolls and people that say I've had like 15 people comment how mad and I've had to delete the comments because I don't want to create a firestorm, but how mad they are that I ate shark fin soup in Thailand, and I didn't realize that it was such a travesty what they're doing to the shark. I don't know if you know anything about this, but they're like cutting fins off sharks and then throwing the bodies back in the oceans. So it's like they consider it not only torturing the sharks but killing off mass population. I've had all these people on Facebook, or not Facebook, but YouTube, like screaming, yelling comments like, I liked your show, but then I saw you the shark fin soup. You're going right to hell. Yeah. But that's YouTube for you. But. Yeah.
And are you doing a Bar Harbor one? Did I see
that? Yeah, sorry. So like I said, to prove the audience, I've got those 2 episodes out there, but they're like, maybe do another one. And I don't have the money to go travel the world again right now for a month. And I was like, you know what? The national park is an hour from where I grew up, and it's also the 100th year anniversary, which is pretty cool. Yeah. But I could shoot this for pennies on the dollar compared to getting a plane ticket somewhere and going. Right. And I actually started a little bit of it last fall before I had gone to Thailand. And it was just so tough to try to get anybody to come down there to shoot with me, because it's not like it's an exotic thing. It's like me looking at my friend and being like, hey, can you come tomorrow with me? And they're like, not really. So I kind of put it on hold. But then this summer, once I signed the shopping agreement with them, I was like, all right, I need to get something done. And Bar Harbor, I mean, I don't know about you. Growing up here, I went there every summer. Yeah. There's nowhere I'd rather be in the world during the summer than Bar Harbor. I mean, Sand Beach can be kind of cold. Maybe a tropical beach would be a little bit better. But in general, I love it down there. So it's a win-win for me because, once again, say nothing happens with the show. I'm spending my summer in Bar Harbor and shooting, which is awesome.
And it's a good way to promote Maine. And Acadia is one of the most visited national parks in the country.
Yeah.
And
I think they got their highest amount of people last year was like the record. So I imagine this year they'll beat that too. Because
I think they're outpacing this summer, with the 100-year anniversary.
Yep.
Well, cool. So I want to ask you a couple more questions about Maine in general, but while we're on the topic of Dirt Cheap, can you just tell people where they can find it, where they can find out more about you and the show?
Okay, so I don't know if we mentioned it. I know you and I talked about it, but I did a Kickstarter, my first one like a week and a half ago, and I had no idea what I was doing. It was like 3 a.m. I'm like, I'm going to make this thing because I hear other people do this. There's a guy in northern Maine that raised like $36,000 for his Kickstarter. So I'm hoping to do the same. I've got, I think, 2.5 weeks left on it. I'm not sure when this podcast will come out, but if you guys are listening and you want, art and film and music and things like that to occur in this state, please support me because that's really the only way it does happen is through avenues like this. And I'm hoping that we'll get picked up and you'll be able to say that you were part of it and help something great happen.
Well, nice transition, because what I wanted to ask you about was you mentioned before how there's really not a lot of entertainment in Maine, and there's certainly more today than there was 10 years ago, but Maine is surely not known as this mecca of production and video work and filmmaking. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts from being in the industry on what Maine could do as a state to draw filmmakers in? Because there's so much value, I would think, both for actually filming things here that would show off the state to a national audience, whether it's in some movie or whatever, or just creating the jobs and attracting the creative types to the state of Maine.
Well, the first thing that I will say, if you are a creative type that has moved back to Maine or wants to work in Maine, go register yourself or your company on the Maine, I think it's mainefilm.com. I'm not positive. If you Google Maine Film Department, you'll find it. But that way, because working outside of the state, I know doing locations or different things I've done, location managing, if you need resources or human beings to work on your project, if you go to Kansas and you're there, those people are obviously there. You know what I mean? People that are in LA working, they move from Kansas. So these people exist, but finding them is really hard. So you want to make sure that people can find you. And just adding myself on there, I ended up working some random Japanese game show that needed transportation drivers. So I drove their transpo van it was down near Bar Harbor like 2 years ago in the middle of winter. And the only reason I got that work was because I listed myself as an available transpo driver. Like the Maine Film website's pretty good. You can click all the things that you're available to do for work. And also the director, Karen, is amazing. She sends stuff out on Facebook all the time. So you want to hit like on the Maine Film Facebook, and so that you're aware of those, and maybe even get on their email list so you're aware of the projects coming through, because they're so rare that when they come through, the jobs get picked up immediately. Yeah. What else would I do in terms of fostering?
Do you think the state government can do anything, or
Yes. Okay. So that was the next point I was going to make. Thanks. my coffee is kicking into overdrive here. So a few years ago, I worked with John Leonard, who's Stephen King's nephew, on Extreme Makeover, and film tax incentives they're a real pain in the butt, because it's kind of, I understand how the government sees it, because they kind of look at it and they're like, okay, these rich producers that are making millions of dollars want to take our it's a double-edged sword. Yeah. But at the same time, if you don't work with these jerk rich producers, nobody's going to come. And Stephen King at the time was like, he had been a real proponent, because think about all his movies, they never get shot here. They're all based in Maine, but they get shot somewhere else to pretend it's Maine. That's even happening with the new It that's coming out in like a month or so. And I remember John and I drove down to Augusta, and we went before the tax board, and it's a bunch. And no offense to any of you if you're listening to this, but it was a bunch of old white guys that kind of just didn't get it, scratch their head, and are like, no thanks, we're not interested. Yeah. So do I want to see the state make tax incentives? Yes, but at the same time, I do get it. Like what one guy said, he's like, well, I'd have to take money away from the nursing homes or whatever it is to try to move. And I don't really even understand how all that works. You're probably the better person because you work in local government to know how that all goes down in finance. But for me, it's like I don't really know how they move things around and make it happen. So I get it if Maine doesn't want to try to foster film incentives like that. But if you look at what Alex did with Waterfront Concerts, the amount of money that comes in because music and concerts are happening here now, if people could understand that with film, think about it, one film, say it's a $30-40 million budget film. Yeah. So if all of a sudden we went from having one film every 2 years to 10 films a year, the amount of money I think would offset the tax incentives and definitely be a huge help.
Well, you'd have a huge production team in town for several months. They'd be buying things.
Exactly. Staying in hotels.
Yeah. There's sales tax, there's hotel, meals, and lodging tax. It could pay for itself. Yeah,
they build sets. So Hammond Lumber would have people buying wood, costuming,
and hiring people. Yeah, I don't get it. I mean, sometimes the government is confusing to me too. Like, would you pay $1 to make $2? I don't know. Yeah. Of course you would, but there's just not a lot of vision around these things sometimes, or it just seems too different. I mean, filmmaking is not one of these bread and butter Maine industries. It's something new. It's something different.
No. Well, that's the thing, though, too, is that we don't make anything in Maine anymore. It's just like the whole country. It's time for us to find new things, and I think selling intellectual property is a great way to go. Yeah. So are we all of a sudden going to have 10 million John Mayers that are born in Bangor tomorrow? No. Yeah. So it's not like we're going to necessarily have people selling intellectual property that way. But one star versus a crew of 300, those are real jobs and real people that are selling intellectual property. So those people get residual checks when that product that was shot on the beach in Bar Harbor is then resold in China on some other market, or and I know we have Maine Woods Law, and I think there's, like I said, that guy that got his Kickstarter picked up who's gonna I should help him out. His name's Tegan. I think he's in production right now, but he's going to travel around the state filming with people that have interesting jobs in the state. Like I think he's doing Gagan's Brother Brewing, and things like that. But those are real jobs. You know what I mean? For instance, I was talking about getting on the email list for Maine Film. I saw his job list come out for like a sound guy and camera guy that pays people real money. Yeah. These aren't minimum wage Walmart jobs. Right. And it's just hard for people to wrap their brains around the fact that we need to do that. We need to transition from making textiles and shoes to things like the internet. Like, there's no reason we don't have a Silicon Valley type of thing here. Right. Like if you picture like Facebook or any of those things, they've got these server farms in like Nevada, with these huge cooling fans, and it's like we could put them up in northern Maine for land that's pennies on the dollar. Or
wouldn't even need to spend as much to cool them.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. Half the year we wouldn't even need it.
All right, my man. Well, I so appreciate you sitting down with me. This has been a fun conversation. I've enjoyed watching you, and I will take you up on that. Maybe we can do a follow-up next summer or the year after or whenever, because I think you're really on to something with this dirt cheap thing.
Like I said, I'm going to throw stuff at the wall till something sticks.
Yeah. Well, good luck to you. Thanks again. We'll post your contact info and everything in the show notes so people can track you down. But if you're listening, Google those shows and see if you can check them out and at least drive the count up, and we'll get you 500,000 downloads or views eventually.
That's right. It's Dirt Cheap with Chas Bruns if you want to Google it on YouTube. I think the only thing that comes above it is the Dirty D's Done Dirt Cheap song. So I'll be right below that one if you want to give me a little click, give me some views.
All right. Well, good luck to you, and thanks again.
Of course. Thank you.
Okay, that's a wrap. Hope you enjoyed that show with Chas. Really interesting, I thought. Chas obviously has a ton of energy. We got through a lot of stuff in that conversation. So thanks again to Chas Bruns for joining me on the show and sharing his perspective on the entertainment scene here in Maine and maybe some ways we could improve it. If you like that episode, please subscribe to The Maine Show on iTunes. Find me, Ben Sprague, on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next week for another episode of The Maine Show Podcast.
You've been listening to The Maine Show with Ben Sprague. Find us on iTunes, on the web at www.mainshowpodcast.com, and check back each Tuesday for a new episode.